Police officers of Reddit, what was your they could have gotten away with it if they had kept their mouth shut moment? I had a car pass me once. Passenger hangs the upper half of his body out of the passenger side window with his middle finger in the air while screaming, "fuck the police." He had my attention for the seatbelt violation. I got behind the car and ran the registration. Registration is suspended. Registered owner's driver's license is attached to the registration and his license is suspended. Registered owner also has 2 warrants for retail theft. I stopped the car and they both started with the "free speech" thing and how I can't stop them for giving me the finger or swearing, which is 100% correct when I pointed out that I can, however, stop them for the passenger not wearing a seatbelt and for the registration violation. Suddenly they got quiet. Driver got arrested for suspended license and his warrants and the passenger got himself a citation. The driver's vehicle got impounded. Moral of the story: tell your passengers to shut their mouths. Had that guy not been a moron, his buddy would have been homeward bound. I was asked to help keep peace while 2 probation officers searched a guy's house. Before everyone gets upset, in most jurisdictions, you have to submit to a search of your person and your home if you're on probation. During the search, a PO lifted the probationer's mattress and said monotonously, "Wow." The probationer got upset and said, "Yeah, it's fucking meth and a gun. Arrest me, I don't give a fuck." Turns out the PO found a huge dildo, but after the guy opened his mouth, the PO lifted the mattress more and found a bunch of individually wrapped grams of meth and a Glock 17. The PO said that seeing the dildo was enough for him to ignore the mattress, but because the guy said something, he kept looking. That guy's attitude and his need to open his mouth got him 10 years in prison. No a police officer, but I do know of this house in my local village that was a notorious drug den. The police came to search the place, but couldn't find anything. As they were leaving, the lovely owner yelled at them that they should brought the drug dogs. So yeah, they came back a few days later with the drug sniffing dogs and found huge amounts of drugs hidden away. Absolute morons. Currently watching Live PD, and the guy told the officer I have caffeine pills in my back pocket, gets them out, puts them on the hood. Everyone's chill. Dude then comes clean and says it's Molly and the officers look at each other and go, "Do we even have a test kit for that?" Other officer says no, dude's face just shows he should have kept his mouth shut. A cousin of a friend of mine travels around the state to take in deadbeat dads. Gets to one place, a 4-year-old kid is home, dad isn't. So the cop starts talking to the kid, making sure he's okay and such. After a bit of this, kid says to cop, "Want to see my dad's secret garden?" Takes him to a closet with a false back, opens it up to see a small pot farm. Guy gets home to a few cop cars and a few charges. Not a police officer, but my mom once managed to talk her way into a lesser fine for a traffic offense, but wasn't satisfied with that, so managed to sass her way right back into the full fine. Sigh. Some idiots from my hometown broke into a few houses in the early 2000s. Among several stolen items was a handheld video camera. They proceeded to record themselves breaking into several more houses and posing back home with their haul. Several of the items, including said camera, ended up at pawn shops. Well, when the battery died they didn't remove the tape. As is customary, the pawn shop found a compatible charger and watched the recordings. Copies of their fingerprints, IDs, and the video were turned into the police and these morons went to jail. Almost everything from the videos was recovered from area pawn shops. Not a cop, but pretty applicable to the thread. When I was in high school I liked to park in parking spots that cars had parked poorly next to, just as a fuck you. One time I was at a high school football game and a Jeep had parked like shit. He was nearly halfway into the spot next to him and parked at an angle. I was driving a 98 feet Chevy Silverado, big old pickup truck, at the time, and I had my brother help guide me into the spot, so I was perfectly in the lines. That made it so the driver door was completely impossible to get in. I took a picture for the novelty of it and went on my way. When I got back to my car the Jeep was gone and every panel on the passenger side of my car was keyed. There was an officer nearby, so I told him about it and showed him the picture. He told me there's not a lot they could do because there were no witnesses, but he'd give it a shot. He looked up their license plate, called them and asked them if they had done it. They confessed and ended up having to pay $1,600 in restitution along with getting a felony. Edit. Grammar. Edit 2. Thank you for the silver and all of the support. This is my first award on Reddit. Not me, but my boyfriend. BF's working overnight when a guy comes through town doing 35 miles per hour in a 25 miles per hour. BF pulls the guy over and asks for his documentation, license, registration, insurance. Guy flips open his glove box, snatches his documents out, and snaps the glove box closed super fast. BF laughs and says, "What do you have in there?" Guy gets a little sheepish and says, "You know, registration, insurance." Whispers, "Little bit of weed." End whisper. BF, "What?" Guy coughs and says, "Registration, insurance, and a little bit of weed." BF laughs again and says, "Seriously? Can I see?" Guy got a slap on the wrist for being honest and having a very small amount. Not a cop, but have a buddy that is. Nothing too crazy, but he's had countless moments where he's tried to give people a break or all they had to do was sit down and be quiet, but they end up talking themselves into jail. Recently had a duty pulled over that was a bit over the limit, but not too much, so he was gonna let a friend pick him up instead of arresting him. Guy got to talking and basically revealed driving under the influence was something he did fairly regularly. A single mistake is one thing, but my buddy decided the best chance at getting him to stop would be learning this lesson the hard way. So this happened a few years ago. I was patrolling with my buddy at night. It was almost the end of our shift. Suddenly, we get an alert that a local nearby gas station had just been robbed, unsuccessfully, and that the suspect was supposed to pass by us in a red car. Indeed, seconds later we saw a man speeding through the road. Details on the side, we ended up courting him on a dead-end street. When my buddy was handcuffing the suspect, I asked the suspect if he had had something to do with the robbery. He repeatedly said, "I have never been there. Ask the ginger lady." Turns out the cashier that night was an old lady named Marcy, covering up for her ill daughter, whom had never been able to identify him since he was wearing a black mask during the robbery, which we never found. Marcy had ginger hair. Fortunately, the suspect was kind enough to inadvertently confess the crime. How could he know the appearance of the cashier if he had never been at the crime scene? The jury thought the same. Not a cop. I had a roommate in college that was no friend of mine. He got in a fight at a bar and was kicked out. He tried to go back into the bar and got thrown out again, but a cop happened to be driving by the second time. Cop told him to relax or he was going to be arrested. He told the cop to arrest him. Cop handcuffs him and puts him in the back of the cop car. Roommate then started banging on the window. Cop then recuffed him with his hands behind his back. Roommate's stupidity carried on for the next couple months. He was supposed to go to court over the whole thing, but didn't show up. Police showed up at his job, cuffed him and brought him to court. Judge told him he would have just received a slap on the wrist, but he now had to send him to jail for a couple days. He was scheduled to report to jail a week or two later, and he didn't show up for that either. By this time, he disappeared. I never saw the guy again. In college, a buddy and I drove out to a house party only for it to get busted as soon as we arrived. In attempt to show my friend how cool I was, I started antagonizing one of the officers from the passenger seat of my buddy's car that was parked on the side of the street, telling him that I'd send him the address to the next party, that kind of thing. We go back and forth until the cop asks my friend move his car into the driveway. He asks for identification and runs my license. After about 30 minutes, he hands me a maximum fine ticket for a seatbelt violation. Clever bastard saw I wasn't wearing a seatbelt, so he had my friend move his car a couple feet so he could ticket me. He wouldn't have gotten away with it, but a patron of the bar that my sister worked at many years ago was stopped by the troopers while driving along next to the highway in the ditch. His explanation: "Officer, I'm way too drunk to be on the road." This is going to be buried, but it's funny, so here. I was a cop on an Air Force base in Alaska. 3 guys robbed a class 6 store, liquor, and we responded to the store, but got caught in traffic at a light on the way. So we were sitting there with lights and sirens on trying to get people to move out of the way when the back door to the car ahead of us opens, and a guy gets out and goes spread eagle against his trunk. Confused, we get out to see what was up and realize that these were the robbers. This situation came from a friend of mine. So he lived with 3 other guys in a 4-bedroom apartment. One day when only one roommate was home, the police came knocking. They asked if they could come in and search for suspected drug use. Here is where I should mention the roommate who was home was kind of an oblivious shootin' who spent most of his day playing WoW or Magic the Gathering in his room. So of course he says sure, come on in. Having no idea what his roommates have been up to, in room 1 they find nothing, as that was the oblivious guy's room. Room 2 they find a personal amount bag of weed. Room 3 they find a pipe. Roommate 3 didn't smoke, but he and RM2 played video games a lot, so it belonged to RM2. In room 4 they find a possession with intent to distribute giant bag of weed. Apparently just a shitload. RM2 told me it was the most weed he'd ever seen in one place, and he was pissed because he always bought from someone else. Didn't know his roommate was a dealer. 3 of the 4 get arrested. Only one who didn't was the guy who let them in. My friend was roommate 3. Charges against him got dropped because RM2 fessed up to the pipe being his and got a slap on the wrist. Not sure what happened to RM4. They never saw him again.